Here we go.
We'll start with this song, As the Deer. As the deer panteth for the water, so my soul runneth after you. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship you. You alone are my strength, my shield. To you alone may my spirit yield. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship you. You're my friend, and you are my brother, even though you are a king. I love you more than any other, so much more than anything. You alone are my strength, my shield. To you alone may my spirit yield. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship you. I want you more than gold or silver, only you can satisfy. You alone are the real joy giver and the apple of my eye. You alone are my strength, my shield. To you alone may my spirit yield. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship you. Let's pray. God, we do long to be in your presence with all of our hearts, and we're glad that we are here together today to acknowledge you and to talk about how we can draw closer to you and one another. We love you and thank you in your name. Amen.
Amen.
All right, we've got a paragraph that we ended on that's highlighted here. Let me see. If it is under the heading Right Relationship with Life Itself, kind of toward the end of chapter 7. And this will be the second, this is the end of the first paragraph. And our writer says, it's been a frequent experience of mine that many people in recovery often have a unique and very acute spiritual sense. More than most people, I would say. It got frustrated early and aimed in the wrong direction. Wild need and desire took off before boundaries, strong identity, impulse control, and deep experience were in place. Deep God experience were in place. So, first thing, let's look at the italicized sentence here. Many people in recovery often have a unique and acute spiritual sense. If we can remember, kind of the premise of the book is everybody deals with addiction. There are recovery groups are founded and centered on one particular type of addiction or one main addiction. And what we find is that we can be addicted to a variety of things. Richard Rohr says primarily the thing that we're all addicted to is our particular way of thinking. That's what we're addicted to. We don't want to let this go. We don't want this to change. We insist on making decisions and going about our life based on this way of thinking. And we won't let this go. So if we would recognize our addiction to that we can't let it go, that we can't live without it, that our lives have become unmanageable because we insist on using this way of thinking, then we will if we can give that up, we can find a road to recovery. So we can be in this boat of, if we place ourselves in recovery, we would have a more acute spiritual sense, because it's about acknowledging our shortcomings, acknowledging our need for God, and then taking the steps necessary to live a completely different life. Essentially one where we are not the ones running everything. Even though we're responsible for our lives, we let God have the primary input. So what he's saying here is that the people that find themselves in recovery, the people that found their lives to be unmanageable, they tended to get that way because their needs and their desires took precedence. My brain told me, my mind told me, I absolutely need this, or I absolutely desire this. And if that is primary, if that's first, before we have boundaries set, our identity set, our impulse control set, and our experiences with God in place, if we have our needs and desires first, we're going to get off the road. We're going to go in the wrong direction. So part of the job of recovery would be kind of to establish things that really weren't established well in the beginning. And so sometimes people can find they've gone through their whole lives and they haven't really clearly set boundaries. They haven't clearly understood who they were. They haven't understood impulse control, and then they haven't had a deep God experience. But if we can have those, it's going to make a world of difference on how we relate to life. So boundaries are, any relationship that we're in with our kids, with spouses, family members, with neighbors, with friends, people in the church. Any relationship is a give and take of some sort. And sometimes there's more taking on one end than giving. Sometimes it's all taking. So if we have boundaries set, we know when to say no and when to say yes. And we allow our relationships to be more equitable in terms of the give and take. And we're probably always going to be attracted to people that are different than we are. So we will be getting from them something we can't get for ourselves, or we'll be giving to them something that they can't get for themselves. But we have to maintain responsibility for our own lives, and we have to allow the other person to maintain responsibility for their own lives. Otherwise, we can become dependent on one another in an unhealthy way, which they call dysfunctional or codependent. Those are terms that are used. So this would be like, it's if you bring a child into the world, the child is 100% completely dependent on you. They can't walk around, they can't talk, they can't get food from the cells, they don't know how to do stuff. So they're 100% dependent on you. And the goal would be gradually to get them to a place of independence where they can leave the house, they can have a life of their own. But many parents, just as one example, many parents will carry this sense of dependency all the way to the grave. Yeah. And will say, you, my child, even though you're 70 years old, you depend on me. And so the nature of that relationship sometimes stays unhealthy. It should be that mom and dad provide 100% when they're tiny, but later on, if we want boundaries, healthy boundaries to be set, then those things change. So sometimes we do this not only with kids, but we can do this in personal relationships. If we have a friend and we're a listening ear to a friend, and the person is kind of sharing their struggles in life and all of that with you, they're taking up your time, they're taking up your emotional energy. And yes, maybe you feel the need to share your time with them and your love with them, but if it gets to the place where this person is taking from and not really giving back anything, then it can end up being a dependent relationship. And it can end up being one that simply drains a person instead of mutually fulfilling in some way. So understanding the dynamics of each one of our relationships is tricky, and sometimes a person will respond negatively if you start to make efforts to set boundaries because they want the codependent relationship.
Could this be connected to the fact that I've kind of observed that children are extremely conservative? My 3-year-old great-granddaughter, when I went into the dressing area, stalls were all full, so I just pulled a blouse over my blouse to see if it approximately fit. She came out and she said, "Oma, you must go in there." To the little rooms. She was tight. I broke the law. And I noticed that about myself. In fact, when I was about 25, my neighbor and I were talking about Archie Bunker, and we said, we think we are prejudiced against the prejudiced, and we wanted to figure out how we were going to loosen that grip. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if that's what's happening here, is you're a young adult and you're grappling with what you should let go of and what you should attach yourself to.
Sure, yeah. We come into this world, I think typically we come into this world with an idealism. We're taught, we're told, or we experience to some degree, this is the way life should be. And usually when we're younger and idealistic, we fight for what's right. We fight for how things should be. As time goes on, a person may realize then there's just reality. The reality is things are not ideal. And things never have been ideal, and things never will be ideal. Things are the way that they are, and that's the ideal. So that we do, I think for everybody there is, I wonder if some of that has to do with how hard life kicks you, how early life kicks you really hard, kind of like plays a part in how idealistically you hold on to things. There are some people that they're far on in life and they're still very idealistic. Yeah.
I find it difficult to introduce my children. I'll say, these are my kids, these are my children, and they're all in their 70s.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Well, doesn't the Bible even talk about that? There were 2 creation stories. The first one is beautiful and good, and at the end, God creates humans. In the second one, He creates humans first. They name the animals as they're created, and then everything falls apart. And it seems like that's the way life is. Sometimes you have this great view of how beautiful, and then things kind of fall apart.
Then there's reality.
Yeah.
Skip says it really well. He says sometimes you're the bug and sometimes you're the windshield.
Yeah, nice. It's true. Yeah, so that's, idealism is part of it. Setting our boundaries with one another it could be related to where the other person is in life. So what we let somebody get away with, we may not let another person get away with because of where they are. And so factored in here is kind of like I think we should acknowledge that we do grow and change. We hopefully become wiser. And so maybe we give a little bit more grace and wiggle room to we talked about this on Sunday actually. So Paul says that there's some people who cannot eat certain foods because they grew up learning you're not supposed to eat this, this, and this. Right? So that's the law. That's what the culture has said. And then when a person converts to Christianity, then there comes this teaching of, well, actually, all things are clean. And there's another section, the text we had on Sunday was from Romans. The other similar section is in 1 Corinthians, and it's about food being sacrificed to idols. And Paul says to that church, he says, some people will not touch food sacrificed to idols. Other people say and acknowledge idols don't even represent anything. There is no other gods. So there's only one God. So even if they sacrificed it, they sacrificed it to nothing. So this food is not spoiled. So I can eat this food. So the early church had to deal with these different ways of thinking. One is a very black and white, idealistic kind of world. The Bible says, the Old Testament says, don't eat food sacrificed to idols. The book of Acts in the New Testament says, don't eat food sacrificed to idols. And then Paul comes in and says, by the Holy Spirit, we know idols don't matter. We know all this food is created by God. That was an old way of thinking, and we have freedom in the Spirit, and so we can eat. But then he goes on to say, but don't let your freedom and your maturity be a stumbling block to the person who insists that they don't eat food sacrificed to idols or they only eat vegetables, because they're doing it out of their conscience to God and for the right reasons. So don't tell them, oh, you're just stupid, immature, and you need to wake up. Don't ruin their faith just because your faith is different. So that's a kind of another way of it's how we relate to one another and where we set boundaries, you know.
Yesterday I saw an interview with Bill Gates, I don't remember where, but anyway, the interviewer said to him, is there something you would do differently if you were to start over? And or if you know, what you did then was a difference. And he said, well, at that time of my life, I wanted to be only around people like me. And he said, my children have taught me, and life has taught me, the more varieties of people there are more people gifted in other ways than I. And I thought, we've been talking about that. We're on different journeys. And my son at his work, there are things that some people do better in his town department than him. So they give those jobs to them, and they give him jobs that are good, that he does well.
Right.
And it's sure a lot different. Like when I felt like when I was young, I had to do everything really good because that's what my education taught me.
Mm-hmm. So some boundaries, some ways of thinking about boundaries would be, I'm only associating with people that think like I think. And I set a boundary and I exclude everybody else. So that is one boundary. But is that the best boundary? That's a good question. I think it takes a mature person to be able to have relationships with people that don't think the same way, that may think very differently. One of the things that I think is and I don't say this a lot, but I think in a lot of ways, the people that you find that are agnostic or atheist, sometimes the reason that they are is that they are more mature, and that's why they've gotten to that point. So essentially, they may have grown up like most, basically believing God is like Santa Claus. He sees you when you're sleeping, he knows when you're awake. So you got a naughty list and a good list, and some old guy, some faraway place, far away from us, but you better watch out. And so there, essentially what we can do in religious circles is we may not make it that silly, but really we believe the same thing. That it's some old guy and he is looking at our lives, he's judging us, He's making sure we do the right thing, or there's going to be consequences. And that essentially is the way. So a person that says, I don't think God is like that. I don't think we can know that. I don't think that life is a reflection of that. For a variety of reasons, a person might say, I don't believe in that. Therefore, I'm an atheist because I don't believe in that.
Oh, how interesting.
Whereas it doesn't mean the person doesn't believe in a life force or a beginning of all things created or something that ties everything together, or that there is a sense of karmic justice in this life. But a person would say, but I don't think that it is the person you're telling stories about. I don't think it's that way. So I don't believe that. So I'm an atheist or agnostic. So it's actually that person has grown and they're more mature in their way of thinking than the other. Now, what I would say is, I think both are right in a lot of ways. Both have very, I'd say they have very honest, and they have very honest perspectives. They have thoughtful perspectives. They have committed perspectives, and maybe they're both right, and maybe in some ways they're both wrong. But maybe we shouldn't say that I won't associate with the childish Christian or the unbeliever. We maybe should say God's more than just Santa Claus, and maybe we should say, but I don't throw out all spirituality and all mystery of life. So anyway, that's about boundaries between folks. We have this idea of strong identity. If we have a strong sense of who we are as a person, it's going to make a big difference in how we go through life. That means we know what we want, we know what we like, we know what we don't like, we know what our goals are. And when we have that kind of really rooted inside of us, and I'd say you may not have a really solid sense of that to the point where you can really, in a constructive and independent way, go about life on your own, probably until you're in your 30, maybe early 20s. Because there's a lot of, when you're coming out of childhood and adolescence, it's a lot of, you're figuring it out. You don't really know for sure what you like, so you try a lot of different things. You don't really know what you want to do, so you try a lot of different things. You don't know what kind of people you want as friends, so you try a bunch of things. So it's probably not until you're, into your 20s, maybe, that you really kind of say, this is what I'm committed to, this is who I am, and kind of go through life. So if you never get that, it's possible that you could keep going and you really don't know. I like this and sometimes I don't. And it just depends on how I feel today, and I don't know what I want out of life. Today I want this and tomorrow I want something else. And so not having any kind of direction, you're probably going to be more susceptible just to get addicted to whatever I feel and whatever I need right now is what's going to guide me.
How do you feel with it concerning your son? I remember when I went to college, my mother used to say, the world's your oyster, you can be anything you want. That's not what I wanted. I wanted somebody to say, you're good at this, or try this. I needed direction, which I didn't get.
Yeah.
So I had to try and figure it out myself. Mm-hmm. Now your son's going to college.
Yeah.
Are you giving him direction, or is he deciding everything himself?
We have conversations about it, and I'm like, I think talking with him through it. It's important that he figure it out, but it's also important that he have access to good information. So I wouldn't feel comfortable just say, hey, go
You can't
figure it
tell them
out.
what to do, no.
But so I've done things like, I have found benefit in personality tests. There's different types of personality tests. There's like the Myers-Briggs, which is kind of like you get 4 different letters, and there's like 16 different personality types or temperament types. And if you learn about the temperament types or personality types, it can help you know what is it that you tend to be good at, or what you tend to be attracted to, and the types of relationships and the leadership style and things like that. So some of like the Myers-Briggs has to do with introversion or extroversion. And essentially that means when you're in a group of people, an extrovert will be energized by the group of people and get more energy. An introverted person, when they're in a group of people, they'll be engaged and enjoy it, but it will lower their energy, and they need to go back and kind of refuel on their own. The extrovert has low energy and gets drained by doing stuff themselves, and then they need to gain their energy by getting with people. So knowing where you are, it can really help. It'll help you know what's going on. Why am I feeling this way? Well, you just hung out, you just went to a party with a whole bunch of people. That's why you're so tired. Because if you're an introvert, that's going to zap your energy. Another person, why am I so down? Well, you need to get out and go hang out with some friends and like boost your energy level. So that's just one. There's other parts of intuition or
Sensing.
intuition or sensing, which is kind of like how you base your decisions. Do you base it on logical judgment of, weighing the options, or do you just kind of go with the gut feeling? There's thinking, feeling, and then the last one, which is as big as perceiving and judging.
Yeah.
So perceiving and judging means some people like to make a decision right now and then deal with the challenge of the consequences. Another person wants to wait and sort through all the information and then reach a conclusion. So you become a combination of these things, and that kind of gives you a sense of, would you be a good teacher or a doctor or a nurse or a fireman or a writer or whatever. What would you tend to be good at? And another type of test, you can do aptitude tests as well, where they'll ask you a bunch of questions about your interest, and when you're done, it'll give you kind of a list of different careers to go through. Another part that's important in going through life is learning how to have healthy relationships with people. So knowing how to communicate with a person is of utmost importance if you're going to have a relationship. If we can't share what we're thinking and feeling with another person, we really can't have a relationship. We can't have a very deep relationship. Yeah. So learning how to do that, learning how to support people and listen to people, but also learning how to step in and confront people in a situation with something that's uncomfortable when there's a disagreement. So there's a balance between giving guidance and letting them find their way. The Ian's generation has been raised, the last 2 generations have been raised by parents that tend to get too involved, and they tend to give too much input. So there's a term called helicopter parenting, which essentially means the kid goes about their life, but the parent is a helicopter following them around, looking at everything they do, constantly giving them input. So there's a big difference. One of the big differences between this generation and ones before is generations before is kids were told, get out of the house and don't come back until the sun goes down.
Yes.
And then you had to go and figure it out. You had independence, you had free time, you had risk, You had, maybe friends or maybe your imaginary friends, whoever it was, you were out kind of doing life on your own, and that helps you to develop a way of seeing things and a way of making decisions and a way of having freedom and being independent. When we go through a period in the late 80s, early 90s where everybody was afraid their kids are going to get kidnapped and molested and all of that, so kids weren't allowed to go outside anymore. They stayed indoors, and they stayed supervised. So you can get to the place now where a kid can be Ian's age, and they haven't really had independent time to do whatever they want. They haven't learned how to handle the freedom, and that can be devastating, because sometimes if somebody's raised, it's almost like you raise a tiger in the zoo, and then you just set them free in the wild. Well, the wild's a little different than the zoo. And if you haven't gradually learned how to take care of yourself, how to see danger, and how to stand up, and how to run, and all that, you're lost. So
you may be a tiger, but there's somebody out there that might just kick
yeah,
your butt.
yeah. You may be a tiger on the outside, but on the inside,
You're
if
still
you're
inside
not,
the zoo.
you're not very. Yeah, you're just kind of a baby that's being
You
fed
talked about
everything.
the different tests that people can take, and I've taken more than my share over the years. So the hardest part for me, I think, with any of those tests was being honest with my answer to what the question is.
Okay.
That was always, because I know some of the tests, it's like, well, I put down what I wanted to be, not
Okay.
Not what
So you were
really is.
thinking about how is this going to affect my results?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and that will end up giving you back probably something that you're not.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. It is hard to be honest. Yeah.
David Cowan's mother, when she comes, she's a minister, and when she comes to Jupiter to visit him, and he's a music director at the church, UCC church there, she has a community invitation to do a test. Now, this is a really big one, like there's 16 types of personalities that were put together by monks or fathers or somebody. But it's interesting to me as she tells you what this different personality is like, each one has a sin connected to it. It was her way of saying you get in trouble.
Is it the Enneagram?
What?
The Enneagram?
Gee, it doesn't sound familiar,
Okay.
but I can't remember. This was
Yeah.
years ago I went to it. I'm a nerd, and my sin is I'm greedy for information.
Oh, all right. Yeah.
And I thought, well, that was one of the lesser sins.
Could have been worse.
But it's interesting
Right.
how if knowing yourself means, well, let's maybe settle down, you have to read a book every day, It's-
Right. Yeah, I don't know if it's the same one, but the Enneagram, ENN, starts with ENN, Enneagram, that I think is 9 different personality types.
No, this is-
And I think you have a primary and then you have your wings. So you're actually a combination of 3 different types, with one of them being primary. And they'll do things like tell you essentially what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are. And that can be helpful. It's good to be honest and knowledgeable about what am I good at, what am I not good at. And if we can own it, then we don't if we're not aware of our weaknesses, or if we're not honest about our weaknesses, then it will be more of a handicap to us as we go through life. Whereas if we know where we're weak, and then we seek out the support to kind of make up for that, then we can be fine. I mean, I found out that my brain is not mathematical, because I lean a part of it is I lean into the intuitive a lot, and so I think about things in broad terms, and I can appreciate the details, but my brain gets tired really fast of keeping track of details. So when I'm doing math or numbers, I always ask somebody to come and check up on me. I'll play around with budget numbers for the church, And I'll always tell Kelly, like, double check my numbers, make sure that I didn't mess things up. But I'm thinking broad terms, I can see something in,
How do you relate
Very
to a
different
son who
ways.
wants to be an engineer? That's their basic language is math.
the classes that have been the biggest challenge for him have been English classes.
Isn't it?
And I was an English teacher.
Right.
Yeah. So, and the interesting thing is, if I come in and help, I have to be aware that I'm thinking like an English major. I'm thinking like an English teacher. And so one of the reasons why it doesn't click with him is because he doesn't think like that. So how do I help someone to interpret a story or read through literature and analyze it in a certain way if I'm so far away from that way of thinking? It's been interesting, just to see the difference.
You
And-
talked about 16 different personalities.
That was my test. I don't know. If
Yeah,
that's-
If you
the
have an
Myers
extrovert,
Briggs
an
the
introvert,
Myers
or
Briggs
what?
is like that.
What other kinds of personalities are there?
Well,
Just
then-
a couple of examples.
Well, there are people who are coming from love, and they can be the overpowering parent. There was, oh gosh, I can't remember them all, but there was a lot of them, and it's not the introvert extrovert thing. It's you answer what you like and dislike about different things, and I wish I could remember, but it's been 20 years since I took that.
Yeah, there was there is a website. Is it this one? Yeah, this one that's called 16personalities.com. It can give you a sense here. So let me see if I can make this bigger. So if you look here on the screen, so you have the 4 major categories, and then within those categories, you have 4 different types. So you have the analyst, people who are analyzing.
I need a microscope.
Yeah. You have let me do one at a time here. Let's see. Yeah, it's not going to cooperate here. So the analyst can be an architect, a logician, commander, debater. These are people that are known for rationality, impartiality, and intellectual excellence. A diplomat is known for empathy, diplomatic skills, and passionate idealism. The sentinels are they're known for their practicality, and they focus on order, security, and stability. And then the explorers are known for their spontaneity, ingenuity, and flexibility.
Well, I'm
So
getting the idea.
those are the
Okay.
major categories, and then within those you have varieties
Okay.
as well. Yeah. So
Long
knowing what you are, it can be very insightful to know, like, oh, this is why I've decided to do with my life what I've done, because it's kind of locked into who I am as a personality.
That could be a detriment as well.
They're not perfect. These personalities are not perfect. You
If
could,
you're told you're something, that's in your mind, and that persuades you to do certain
it could
things.
be.
Yeah, I don't know if I like that.
Well, a lot of these things-
Probably you're the personality type that doesn't like to be told what to do and what to think.
Yeah. And a lot of these things are continuum. Their duality is right and wrong. But
Yeah.
there's a middle in here.
Right,
And the whole lot of gradations. And
Right.
if you want to get along with people, you better be in the gradations.
Right.
Not at the extremes.
yeah, it's somewhat helpful. I wouldn't say that it's
Yeah. When I was in high school, mine came out that I should be an auto mechanic.
oh, nice.
Yeah, I said, nah.
Do you see anything though that would indicate you're that, you could,
Yeah,
I was gonna be a professional musician, and I was in band for 8 years and never got beyond last chair. I was there just because I like listening to the music. But all of my best friends and my husband were very good musicians.
Yeah.
So somehow there's a personality.
But that's how my son Ian is like that. He's in the band since 6th grade. He's still in the band. And the majority, if not, yeah, the majority of his close friends are musicians, you know. And some of that's because that's where they met and got to know each other, and they had that commonality. And it's not only the interest in music, but it is the way a person thinks that draws them to music. There's a commonality there, because some person may think similarly to a musician but not be. Yeah, see, it's interesting because I'm somewhat of a musician too, but Ian can pick up on. He'll hear a song once or twice, and he could probably hum it back to you. It sticks in his head, and he can do. And he's got. He doesn't have to practice very much. Once he learns a song, he's kind of like he understands how it goes. Whereas I'm like, one of the reasons why I give this is not only for you, it's for me. And it's like if I don't have my chords here in front of me, I'll fumble around. And I hate memorizing, so I'm not going to do that.
There is usually a connection between those that are good in music as well as math.
Yes.
Yeah, my husband's an engineer and he's a good musician.
Right. But that's
That
not the
makes
case
sense,
for me,
yeah.
though.
Well, they've said that, you know, the universal language is music and math.
Yeah.
Because 2
Yeah.
plus 2 is 4.
Right. It's a black and white world.
Yeah.
The rules are very crystal clear. You can't. There's no gray area really.
And with music, you know, it's everybody hears music.
A pitch is a pitch. A frequency is a frequency,
Yeah.
and it's just that's just
It's very
the way it
mathematical.
is.
I
Yeah.
was assigned to do a term paper when I was a senior in high school, and I said, I'm going to do one on music. What is it that we like music? And I looked at, there were no books on it. And I had already told the teacher I was going to do it, so I had to just make up stuff. But it was kind of interesting because now I remember that. And I heard someone say, well, we like music because it's compelling to our basic. All living in the wild, you've got the drums, which is the branches rubbing against each other, the birds that are trilling, and and I thought it was something much more spiritual than that, but it's really just the environment is in music.
Yeah. Yeah. We have frequencies all around us.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they make us feel different things, and so that's this is strong identity. So we've talked about boundaries, knowing boundaries that we set. If we don't set boundaries, we're going to be influenced by people that we probably shouldn't be. We're going to influence people in a way that probably we shouldn't. So just knowing this healthy balance of how do we have healthy relationships, give and take, knowing that, and then knowing who we are in life, and not trying to be somebody that we're not, but really owning who we are. And there's joy in that, and there's freedom in that. There's not, when you can be yourself, there's not pressure, because it doesn't really take much effort to be yourself. Once you're honestly yourself, that's just who you are. You can't help it but be yourself. Whereas if you're trying to be somebody that you're not, it takes a lot of effort, because we're always trying to fill the role instead of just kind of thinking what we're thinking and feeling what we're feeling and interacting the way that we naturally feel like it. So, and then the third one here is impulse control. So we're all going to have impulses toward stuff, you know, and impulses can be good in some ways. You know, having the impulse to eat can be good, because if you didn't have it, you would die. You'd have to remember, oh, I forgot to eat.
Oh, yeah,
But because we have this impulse, but then there is I recognize this. This happens for me, it happens at dinner time, all right? So dinner time, when you start eating something good and it tastes so good and you're getting this, I'm hungry, but I'm being satisfied. You're in this zone, right? Feels real good. So I think it was last night. So I got a plate. I got 3 tacos on my plate. I just fixed these good chicken tacos and all this fresh ingredients and everything. And it's like, that's kind of enough, right? But you get to the end and you're like, man, that was so good. And I'm like, I don't want this feeling to stop, you know? I don't want this feeling. I mean, that's essentially what it is. It's not, because if you step back logically, your stomach is full. The meal is finished. You can move on to the next thing. It's no, like, I don't want to stop this feeling. So it's like, well, I'll just do 2 more. It's not a whole nother plate, but it's like, you do 2 more. And then we can get to the end where it's like, oh yeah, that was too much. But impulse control would be recognizing this is a good feeling, I'm enjoying this, but let me put an end to this now so that I'm not like paying for it later tonight or tomorrow. And learning that impulse control is important. It means being aware of the moment and not simply basing our decisions on, I want to keep feeling this way. I want to keep feeling this way. We can be think of poor teenagers or early in life when we're finally experiencing this in love thing for the first time, right? So we can start to interact with somebody that makes us have that feeling and get to the place where like, I don't want to stop feeling this way. Now, if the other person starts to be a jerk and starts to like treat you bad and talk bad about you, but still is kind of nice to you sometimes, but then turns around and talks bad about you and all that. So you could be in a really bad situation, but if you're just dealing with, but I just love the way they make me feel. If we're dealing with that, that's impulse control. We have an impulse toward a feeling and we're letting that be the thing that determines what is played out in our life.
That's why people in abusive relationships.
There's something about it that a person doesn't want to lose. There's a person about there's something that is desirable about that.
Well,
and
I
it's
know they beat
wild.
me, but geez, they're so nice to me.
It's
at dinner
wild,
time.
but we do it in all kinds of
Yeah.
in all kinds of ways where we allow situations or people to do things that are detrimental to us, but we don't want to let go of the feeling.
Well, I think it's really good to be able to look up here at yourself and your life, because people who are spontaneous have a hard time in groups. I've been on trips with those people, and you have 4 people talk about what do we do next, but the spontaneous person got this idea they want to do that, so they're off, and you have to follow. Even
Right.
everybody else want to do something else.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
you instead of hating them, you just say, oh, that's a spontaneous person.
I was talking about this last week. So there is, whether sometimes it's personality and sometimes it's the way we grow up. Some people are better at living their life individually, and some people are better at living their life as a team. So if a person grew up in circumstances surrounded by a lot of people and doing a lot of stuff together in a good way, then that can kind of be the default mode of that's how I want to live my life. I want to live my life surrounded by people all the time, doing stuff together, which means compromise and making decisions as a group. A person whether they're spontaneous and that's the reason why, or they just have an idea about this is what I want to do and I don't want to compromise that. Some people just want to go it alone. Maybe they don't like the noise. Maybe they don't like the input of people that are going to make their experience not so good. So, I mean, I have felt comfortable being alone since I was a kid. I remember the picture in my mind that stands out is being probably 9 or 10 years old, and I was in a tree house that my dad built in our backyard. Had this great view. It's in Tennessee, so we're on this kind of big hill looking down over our house, which goes down further into this valley. I had this great view from the tree house. And I remember sitting there and just being happy to sit there and just look. Just, I don't know how long. It felt like hours.
Yeah.
As a kid, you don't know if that was 10 minutes, but feeling comfortable
Yeah.
in that environment. But I know many people that's the last thing they would want to do,
Yeah.
is to be by themselves.
Sit there for about 2 minutes and go like, okay, what are we gonna do now?
Yeah. So,
I grew up I'm a loner. I still consider myself a loner. Always did things by myself. I will go out to eat by myself. I will go see a movie by myself. I will go to a football game, a concert, do it all by myself.
right.
And I was in a 19-year marriage where he didn't want to do anything, so I still continue to do things by myself. Still no problem though. And then I met my person who now will go to these football games and concerts and stuff, and it's great. But I will still be a loner until I die though. It's
Sure.
just my personality.
Yeah.
You know.
And I don't know if that's, I'm sure some of that is just like DNA. It's just like we were born that way. And then other parts of it have to do with, whether you grew up in a group setting. I mean, I grew up with 2 brothers, so I had to learn the team thing. We had to learn to share and all that kind of thing.
Right, twin sisters.
Sully grew up the middle.
You were never yourself.
Right. Sully grew up the middle of 9 kids. So there was just pandemonium everywhere all the time, right? So she actually prefers the individual approach and not to make decisions as a team. If her and I are going to make a decision as a team, we have to kind of do it like gently and talk it out and that kind of a thing. But her preference would be, her instinct is going to be, if I want to have the life that I want, I got to just do it. Because growing up, nobody was like listening to anybody else, and nobody was. It was you had to kind of go about it on your own if you wanted something to really happen. So circumstances can make us, this way or that way too.
My husband's very spontaneous, and I call it planner. I don't want to be judging. But he has had to learn over time that if he wants to do things with other people, you have to talk about what you're going to do. You can't just say, "Oh, I'm going to go do this now."
Now, the only thing that would make that work is if the person hanging out with the spontaneous person is super flexible and they don't really care. That it's like, I don't care what we do, I just want to be with you. Well, then the spontaneous person can do whatever they want,
Yeah.
But if the spontaneous person is with a planner and the planner's like, hey, hold on, we need to have a plan before we walk out this door.
You can't buy that.
What do I wear? What do I bring? Where are we going? Yeah, but the spontaneous person is like, I don't know where we're going. Let's go see. So the last section here is a deep God experience. So that's another thing. Now, if I shared maybe this past Sunday I think it was this past Sunday. So I grew up in church, like literally in church, like a certain amount of hours every week, and went to church school, right?
Yeah.
So it's just surrounded by church and all that. But it wasn't until I stepped out of that particular church environment that I won't say I didn't have God experiences in that, but I will say I didn't have certain types of God experiences until I stepped out of that environment. So you can be in a church environment and miss out on certain God experiences. You could be outside of church altogether and be missing out on some God experiences, or you could be outside the church altogether and be having God experiences that church people are not having. So it's kind of like the deep God experiences would be, they're wonderful acts of grace where God gives us this experience of the presence of God for some reason, maybe for no reason, at certain times in our life. And they can be profoundly life-changing, because when a person has a God experience, it kind of changes the way you think about everything. You can think logically, okay, probably there is a God, right? But to feel that God is very different, because one thing is kind of an intellectual exercise, a philosophical exercise. The other is an experience of reality. So if a person has an experience of reality that I believe in God because I experienced God.
Let me say something to you. Last week we mentioned, God, why do you love me? He answered me this week. I felt his hand on my shoulder. First time ever I felt anything. And he said, because you're my child.
Aw.
Well, it's true, isn't it, when you think
Yeah.
about your own child?
Yeah,
No matter what they do, you love them.
yeah, yeah.
That was it.
Yeah, and we love our children because they are our children. We love children because they are changing our lives, and we're excited about it most of the time.
Or scared.
Or scared.
Or scared.
Yeah. But they're adding something. There can be adding a sense of fulfillment, adding a sense of purpose, adding there's a love that gets turned on that is a different type of love than we experienced before.
Yeah.
And there's certain types of love that gets turned on for a particular person, I think. You know, it's like the love that you experience for one person feels a little bit different from the love that you experience with that person.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, I had 4 grandparents. The love that I had for them was a grandparent love, but I love them each in different ways because they were different people, you know? So we can love a child just not only because they're our child, but because they are them. They are exactly them. And the thing that's so cool about it is like you if you look at your kids, you're like, you couldn't change who you are if you tried. I know who you are, and I love you for that. I love you for who you are. So that's I'm glad you had that experience.
I may not like
Thank
what
you for
do
sharing
all the
that.
time, but I'll always love you.
Sure. And then they don't like what we do all the
Yeah.
time too.
And they tell us.
Yeah. So if we have those things, if we have this sense of boundaries, a good sense of who we are, impulse control, and God experiences, we can see how that can have a profound effect on how we go through life. Because then we can kind of handle the bumps and the unknowns and the joys, and we can. But if we didn't have, just imagine not having any of those things, no boundaries, no sense of self, no impulse control, no God experience. If you took that away from somebody, it's no wonder somebody's life goes into looking for something that gives them a feeling because they can't get it any other way. I just want to feel good. And the only thing that I have found that will make me feel good is whatever that is. And a lot of times that's not going to bring the fulfillment like all these other things will. But, so it's kind of like this other stuff is like building a life, you know, and it takes a lot of effort. It takes decision making, takes a community and a family and friends to share with you. So, all right. So we made it through that paragraph. So we just have two.
Well, it was a long paragraph.
And it was a meaty
good, what,
it was a meaty
6-7
paragraph.
lines. I mean, you know.
So we've got 2 sentences left. maybe we'll finish chapter 7 next
This is
time.
great.
Wow, you think?
Or not.
Or not?
Send us out in the power of the Spirit, Lord. May our lives bring Jesus to the world. May each thought and word bring glory to your name. Send us out in your Spirit.